All right. So for pretty much most of you, since I don't really show off my server, just a brief overview of the concept that this was going for. I wanted a file server, but I didn't have a lot of space, so I decided to put it in the fractal node case because the fractal node case had come out fairly recently at the time. It was kind of a new idea. So I put together from spare parts that I had, not too crazy of a setup. It's an AMD A10 APU that I tend to clock up a little bit. I'm running it with about 16 gigs of RAM. I've got an AX750 for the power supply. I'm running three 3 terabyte Caviar Reds with, I think it's a Crucial SSD. Man, it's been a while since I've cracked this thing open. I actually used to have a second computer in this. I had a separate SSD and a 500 gig blue drive just so that I'd have a backup rig, because I also used to have a graphics card in here, but that was before the power supply blew and I had to replace it with this AX750. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's not a lot of real estate. So if I take, for example, my triple fan cooled GTX 770, this is actually physically too big for this chassis. I can't make it work. I tried, but it's actually too thick. I tried putting it in, but because of the aftermarket cooler and because it's so tall and it doesn't sit down in among the components, I couldn't get the cover back on. So it's still sans graphics card at this point. So it's still just a file server. No slouch. I mean, I run it, I think last time I had it tuned to like 4 gigahertz or more than that. I can't remember. Like I said, it's been a while since I've dug this out. Brief tour of the setup or the chassis. It actually has the power supply in the front as opposed to the back, which keeps things pretty tight. It actually runs the power cord up to the power supply from the back end. It's got, you can't see them, but it's got two 92 millimeter fans in the front to draw in air with a fan controller switch on the back here. High, medium, low, nothing fancy. Got a 2-slot high PCI mount. When ITX first really became popular, you didn't really have a whole lot of triple slot cards, and even now, like they experimented with it briefly, but they quickly found out that people don't like using 3 entire slots off the back of their computer in order to fit a graphics card in. Plus, ITX took off, and a lot of the ITX chassis didn't have a 3rd slot, so you couldn't use a triple slot card. And so most of the manufacturers seem to have gone back to using a 2-slot, even for their high-end cards, and then just upgraded the coolers, made the cards bigger, so they could disperse heat a little bit better. So it's a little bit of a rat's nest in here, and that's kind of out of necessity. I haven't sat down and done any custom cables for this, so all the power supply cables are the stock cables that came with the power supply, none of which are short cables. They're all fairly long, which means I've got to stash that extra loop. I've got whole bunches of extra plugs that I've got to bundle up. So there's not a whole lot of extra real estate in here. Everything's pretty tight, which is why I didn't go with an air cooler. Now, this has enough space that if I had been a little bit more careful with my cabling, with my wiring, and actually took the time to make sure that all my cables were managed a little bit better. Although I don't think I have a whole lot of options for this, but it's more if I had been able to do custom cabling or any sort of alternate cabling solution, I could have fit a pretty big cooler fan because it has on the back space for a 140 millimeter fan, which means that theoretically I could fit up to a 140 millimeter cooler. But as many of you will know, one of the major problems is the fact that whether it fits is determined as much by the position of the CPU socket with relation to everything else as it is the physical dimensions of the cooler. And this actually, the CPU spot is a little forward for my taste, if I was going to run an air cooler in this space. If it had been like a centimeter back, maybe I would have considered it. But at the time, I put in an H80i cooler. Now, that was 4 years ago. So this is an old rig that I've been upgrading as I go. But finally, my H80i bit the dust, sent it back to Corsair. Corsair warranty support is freaking legendary because it's always been this way whenever I've dealt with their warranty department. So I sent mine back, and it was very much broken. I think either the pump was busted or it was low on coolant, one of the two. But I sent it back. They definitely said, yeah, it's definitely broken. And they said, we don't have an original H80i in stock. Would you mind if we sent you back a V2? I was like, no, I would not mind if you upgraded me for free. Still figuring it was going to be an RMA component. It was going to be, brown box, something that they refurbished. But no, they sent me a brand new in-box, like retail packaged H80i V2. So that's what we're putting in today. Theoretically, it has all the same dimensions of the original H80i. Has new fans and stuff, so it actually don't need those. But one of the things I'm probably going to need to do, unless the cooler is as cross-compatible as I hope it is I'm going to have to rerun a lot of cables, because the H80i, the original, was actually was powered off of a SATA power port, and then had a separate cable, which you can see here. I'm going to try and see if I can get it out so you can see it. It's hard to see. But it had a little USB cable that you ran to an internal USB header, and that was for the software control. And then, let's see if I left it plugged in. I may have taken, I think I took it out. Because I left it attached to the fans. And then they had these custom fan headers with a custom plug that plugged into the H80i. Now, because the H80i used the same block pump that the H100i, the twin fan version of the same cooler, did. And the twin fan was supposed to be able to support a push-pull on both fan options. So it's supposed to support 4 fans. It only had the space for 2 plugs, so they did a splitter. So now we get to the fun part. I'm going to toss those somewhere. We get to crack open, and it's a little smushed here, so they probably pulled this from their blemished stock. It's not uncommon for higher-end retailers to basically pull a bunch of, if their packaging gets damaged, pull the packaging, keep it for support replacements, warranty replacements, because at that point they don't care about the packaging. And then you don't have a bunch of busted up looking boxes out on shelves where you're trying to put on your best face. So, looks like, okay, so this is just a demo for the AMT mounting bracket. Oh, fun. It would seem that I may actually be gutting my server entirely to pull a board out, because this bracket may actually be required to connect it from the back. And as you can see from the bottom of my chassis, I don't have a way to access the bottom of my motherboard, the back of my motherboard, while it's installed. So maybe pulling that out as well. So let's see how things go. All right, so got some fans. These are, I think these are the exact same model. They're a little darker gray than what I had previously, but the fan blades look exactly the same. Cables look exactly the same. So we got two of those. Actually, let me toss this up. All right. This is the actual cooler, which, oh my, is significantly larger than the H80i, which to my mind reads more robust. Oh, I wonder, because the radiator seems to be slightly smaller. I'm wondering if the old one used to have the pump in the radiator, not in the block. But you can see plastic tray. One of the differences that you'll see, sorry, get the glare off, is it's actually a round mount, round block, which, if I'm going to be honest, that's a little odd. Like, I know circles are a thing in design, but your CPUs are always square. So every professional water block I've ever worked with, every aftermarket third-party custom water block I've ever worked with has had a square bottom. So circular bottom's a little weird, but then we've got, looks like you'll have one plug that'll be into the CPU socket, on the CPU fan socket. Then you've got your twin fan headers for the fans. Does still have the standard USB micro connector, so I don't have to rerun that cable. Cable or tubes are about the same thickness, but they are braided sleeving, which is nice. Doesn't feel as awkward. The other ones were just hard rubber, which, I mean, it looks nicer, but 6 of one, half dozen the other for actually working with it. It's still rubber underneath, so it's got the same capabilities of being bent. It has the same sort of tension. All right, box of things. So yep, so this is exactly, so you couldn't see it in there, but I can show you better here. So this is the cable that I was talking about earlier. So you can see it's got that USB header and then that USB micro connector, and that plugs into that port and then plugs into your motherboard. That way you don't have to run the USB cable outside the chassis. But I won't need that because I already have one. So this will be the Intel bracket, which we don't need. This will be the AMD bracket, which we will need. And then we've got indicated 4 holes for the AM4 socket, other 4 holes for all other AMD socket types, 2, 3, FM1, FM2. As with most blocks, it's usually fairly self-evident which holes you need to be using because it's the only ones your screws will line up for. And if the screws line up with a different one, it doesn't usually hurt anything. So now I need to get the standoffs. So we've got to have, so here we're going to have one side of these screws is going to go into the standoffs, and one side's going to go into the washers, or the thumb nuts. And then we've got the Intel standoffs. Ah, this is what I was looking for. Which I'm a little confused as to how they want us to. This could be problematic. I may need to salvage a backplate because they don't have an AMD backplate to go with this. Unfortunately, the ASRock FM2 8088X ITX Plus board, which is what this is based on, used plastic retention clips, which tends to mean no backplate. These are expecting a backplate. Fun. All right. This is going to be the fan screws and washers, which we'll save that for later. And we'll save that for somewhat later. These are going to be what we need. Here's the standoffs. So yeah, long story short, I'm going to have to start things off by pulling this sucker out. Which I'm going to be honest, wasn't what I was hoping to do today, but is probably necessary at this point because I need to pull, I have a busted Wi-Fi antenna I need to pull off anyway. So, fortunately, I have routed my cables such that I should be able to get this board out without too much difficulty. The fear I always have when working with, we'll call them less expensive motherboards, is that I might rip out a socket. I'm trying to pull plugs out or bend a pin and then not be able to get everything back in how it's supposed to. So you always, my trick is usually rock it side to side a little bit. Now, one of the reasons I like this board over a lot of the more high-end versions, and why I went with this board over more high-end versions, there we go, is that this board has six SATA ports, SATA 3s. They're all SATA 3s, which is necessary when I was building the original rig, which ran 6 drives. Technically, this chassis is built to hold 6 drives, but it's only supposed to hold 4 drives when you have a graphics card in it. But thanks to how they line up the SSD screw holes, you can actually mount an SSD to the outside of the drive caddy. And so you can do one on this side, one on that side, 2 drives inside each of them. You have to put this one in first and then slide it over so the SSD just barely brushes this support. And then the other one sits on this side. And so you can run 2 SSDs and then 4 full-size hard drives while only using 2 of the caddies. And that still leaves you enough room for a graphics card, in theory. Now, one thing that I will mention about this chassis, if anyone decides to use this chassis or a similar chassis, is full-size power supplies are nifty and easy to work with in most things. Not so much in these. I just about barely I almost ran out of room with this one. I apologize, this is the HX750, not the AX750, which I believe is actually slightly bigger. But when shopping for small form factor ones, you should also be careful to pay attention to the dimensions, because if you're not careful, you might pick up one of these. This is a Silverstone SX650G. It's a SFX power supply. Now, I wasn't paying attention, didn't realize it was an SFX, which means it's a small form factor. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, you'd say. Maybe it's a little narrower, a little shorter. Well, it's a little bit more of a problem. So this is the cutest thing I've ever seen. It's teeny tiny. It's got itty bitty fan. It's modular, but it's SFX, which means it does not fit in the ATX mount in this chassis. So that makes this chassis extra problematic because you have to get an ATX power supply that is also short enough to still give you room for a full-length graphics card. Or you just get one of the newer graphics cards that don't extend past the PCI slot and call it a day. But I just wanted to show you that because it's ridiculously tiny. All right, so board is unscrewed. Cables are all unplugged. I'm going to leave the RAM plugged in here just for a bit because it might give me a bit more of a handle to get this thing out. The trick is going to be all these cables that I've been running are kind of in the way for how I would normally like to get this board out. So hopefully I can get them up out of the way. I don't have to rerun all my cables. A minute. Oh, come on. Slide this out very carefully. Come on. What are you caught on? Oh. Thermal grease gets everywhere. That's why. Come on. There we go. All right. I'm going to set that down for just a minute while we work on this. All right. Let's get those screws in there. All right. So, get some dust bunnies out there. So usually, if you are being super thorough about cleaning your processor off, you should use a little bit of rubbing alcohol because that'll help break up the thermal grease and it will evaporate any moisture off of your CPU lid. But I find decent enough luck just with good quality paper towels or toilet paper, and then make sure that you don't leave any lint on there. Now, you don't want to touch it with your fingers because that gets your oils on there. That messes with the thermal grease. It's not optimal. So I'm actually going to leave the CPU in just because I don't want to mess with getting it out and around and stuff. So what I am going to do, and it's as I feared, these are, you can see there's no backplate. So we're going to pop these bad boys out. Get the clips removed. I'm going to see if I've got a spare AMD board somewhere to pull a backplate from. All right, so we have luck. I actually pulled this from a server that we were recycling at work. As you can see, we have already been taking this apart before. Now, my question and hope is that because I cannot remember if it was the FM2 or the FM3 Plus, sorry, the FM4, AM4 or AM3 Plus, who first changed the mounting format. I believe it was the AM4, because if it was the AM4, that means that the retention clips from that board will actually work with this board, and the backplate from this board will work with that board. And that way, I'm not kneecapping a very, very fine motherboard. Honestly, the Sabertooth motherboard was one of my favorite motherboards back when I was running AMDs in my rigs. Well, that's promising. Looks like same format. So, clip that in. Okay, so this board is now done. It still has the necessary mounts. Yep, there we go. All right. All right, so back plate. Now here is a mild problem. Crud. Because there's some circuitry on the back here that I am not super excited about covering up. All right, let's see what we can do here. That should be okay. All right. All right. We're actually going to remove these SATA cables because they were what's making it difficult to get the processor or to get the motherboard in and out. These power cables are fine. What that means, we can actually remove these two that aren't hooked up to anything, that are holdovers from the old build. And then I can bend these out of the way. There. Put one power plug out of the way. There we go. All right. So we're going to leave these cables pulled out of the way for now, because we're going to have to remanage everything again once we put this in. And I need as much room as possible to manipulate this to get it in place. So what I can do is plug in the audio cables. And the USB cable. All right. How do they want us? Oh, okay, so it is. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so that clip was significantly harder to get out than I expected. Okay. All right. All right. right. There we go. Okay. All right. So. Where are you, CPU fan? Here's a chassis fan. And the speaker. Ah. Is that you? Yeah, that's you. So unfortunately, this new unit, so the old unit used to have fittings on the side that I could rotate. And this one has them coming out the top, which means they're coming up where the fans need to be. So let's try that this way. Hmm. All right. All right. All right. Moment of truth. All right, so we only got one fan going. Let's find out why. There we go. All right, guys. So work is done on this. It's up and running. I was able to log in remotely to get started configuring it, but um, one of the downsides is that my server's been offline for about a year, so the software's out of date. It's a new version of the cooler, which means I need new drivers, and I also need to download the uh, Universal Engine system. So that's going to be boring to look at. It's going to be me looking at a lot of progress bars and rebooting a bunch. So I'm going to sign off. But if you enjoyed this or if you have fun, stick around because this is just the start. Uh, I'm prepping to do my Lego build, which is I'm going to build a Lego computer out of Legos. I have a giant box of Legos from the Lego excavator set that I'm going to be using to build the chassis. I've got a pile of hardware that I'm going to put in to run the computer, and it's going to be my new living room computer so that we can play PC games in the living room